The day my mother had her stroke, I was 40 minutes away, stuck in a meeting I couldn't leave. My phone lit up on the conference table, my aunt's number, and I excused myself so fast I knocked my chair back. By the time I made it to the hospital, my mother was already in the ICU, unconscious, with a tube down her throat, and machines doing the breathing she couldn't do herself. I stood in the hallway outside her room for a long time. I didn't cry, I couldn't. I just kept staring at the little window in the door, watching the numbers on the monitors like they were telling me something I needed to understand. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you right now? What time is it where you are? My mother's name is Loretta. She's 63, and up until the day she collapsed in her kitchen, she had been the most capable person I knew. She raised me alone after my father left when I was 4. She worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. She saved enough to buy a small house in her 50s, paid it off early, and had built up a retirement account she was proud of, around $340,000, most of it from an insurance settlement after a car accident years ago. She talked about that money the way some people talk about a safety net. It's there if I need it. It's there for you if something happens to me. Something happened. And the money was gone before I even knew to look for it. My mother has one sibling, her younger brother, my uncle Terrence. He's 58, never married, lives about 20 minutes from her house. Growing up, he was around enough that I knew him, but not close enough that I trusted him. There was always something slightly off about Terrence. The way he laughed a little too loud at things that weren't funny, the way he'd ask about Mom's finances in the middle of normal conversations and then wave it off like he was joking. Mom always defended him. He means well. He's just had a hard life. He doesn't have what we have. What we had was modest. What Terrence had was less. And apparently, that gap was something he'd been quietly planning to close. When Mom collapsed, Terrence was the one who found her. He called 911. He followed the ambulance to the hospital. He was there in the waiting room when I arrived. He looked shaken. He hugged me. He said all the right things. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to suspect in those first horrible hours, was that Terrence had held my mother's power of attorney for the past 3 years. She'd set it up during a health scare in 2022, a brief hospitalization that turned out to be nothing serious. She'd wanted someone local to handle things if she was incapacitated. She'd chosen Terrence because he was nearby, and because she trusted him, and because she never imagined she'd actually need it used. She needed it used. He used it. I spent the first 4 days at the hospital almost entirely. I slept in the waiting room, I ate vending machine food, I talked to neurologists and nurses and a social worker who gave me a folder of resources I never opened. My mother remained unconscious. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, which I learned meant they genuinely didn't know. On the 5th day, I went home to shower and feed her cat and pick up some things. I stopped at her house first. I had a key. The house felt strange in the way empty houses do when the person who fills them is somewhere else. Her reading glasses were on the kitchen counter. Her coffee mug from that morning was still in the sink. I stood there longer than I needed to. On her kitchen table was a stack of mail. I started sorting out of habit. Most of it was junk. One envelope was from her bank, her investment account, the one she built up over years. I almost set it aside. Something made me open it. The balance shown was $11.47. I read it 3 times. I turned it over. I looked at the account number to make sure it was hers. It was hers. 3 weeks before her stroke, there had been 2 large transfers out of that account. One for $200,000, one for $140,000, totaling $340,000, every dollar she had. The transfers were authorized using her power of attorney. Terrence's name was on the authorization forms. I sat down on her kitchen floor. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that her cat came and sat on my lap, which he'd never done before. I remember thinking that was strange. I remember not being able to think anything else. Here's the thing people don't understand about these situations. You don't immediately call the police. You want to. Every rational part of you is screaming to call someone, do something, fix it right now. but you're also alone in your mother's kitchen, and your mother is unconscious in a hospital, and the account is already empty, and you're terrified that if you move wrong, you'll somehow make it worse. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know if it's legal. You don't know if the power of attorney covers this. You don't know if $340,000 transferred 3 weeks ago can even be recovered. I called a lawyer first. A friend from college had used an elder law attorney when her grandmother was in a nursing home, and I had the number in my phone. I got a call back within the hour. What the attorney told me was clarifying and devastating in equal measure. A power of attorney is a legitimate legal document. It does authorize someone to manage finances, but it does not authorize someone to transfer assets to themselves or for their own benefit. That's a breach of fiduciary duty, and in most states, it constitutes financial elder abuse, which is a criminal offense. The transfers Terrence made were not legal just because he had the authority to use the POA. The authority to manage someone's finances is not the same as the authority to steal them. She told me not to confront Terrence yet. She told me to gather documents, the account statements, the transfer records, anything I could find. She told me to go to the bank in person, speak to a fraud manager, and start a formal dispute. She told me the transfers could potentially be reversed if we moved quickly. I did exactly what she said. I did not go to Terrence. Not yet. The fraud manager at my mother's bank was a quiet, thorough man who had clearly handled situations like this before. He didn't look surprised when I explained what I'd found. That unsurprised expression on his face made me feel sick in a specific way. The way you feel sick when you realize something you thought was rare is actually common. He pulled up the account records. He walked me through each transaction. The transfers had gone to an account in Terrence's name at a different bank. The authorization documents were on file. Terrence had come in person with the power of attorney paperwork, presented identification, and requested the transfers. The bank teller had processed them. Everything had appeared legitimate. It was legitimate, the fraud manager said carefully, but that doesn't mean it was legal. He explained the bank's internal process for disputes involving POA abuse. He flagged the account. He put a hold on any further transactions. He gave me a case number and told me the bank's legal team would be in contact. On the way out, I sat in my car in the parking lot for a few minutes. Then I called Terrence. I kept my voice even. I told him I'd been at Mom's house, going through her mail, making sure everything was in order. I asked him if there was anything I should know about her finances. There was a pause. She had some accounts I've been managing, he said. She asked me to handle things while she was sick. I told him that was good to know. I told him I appreciated him being there for her. I hung up. He had no idea what was coming. The following week was the longest of my life. My mother was still in the ICU, beginning to show small signs of improvement. Her eyes opened once, briefly, and she squeezed the nurse's hand. And I was living this split existence, where I'd sit at her bedside for hours, and then drive home and spend the evenings on the phone with the attorney, reviewing documents, answering questions from the bank's fraud team. Terrence texted me a few times, asking about Mom's condition, saying he'd been praying for her. Once, he asked if I knew where she kept her car title. I didn't respond to that one. My attorney filed a formal complaint with the State Adult Protective Services and submitted a report to the County District Attorney's Office. She also filed a civil suit to freeze any assets in Terrence's name that could be traced to the transfers. This was where things moved faster than I expected. A judge granted a temporary asset freeze within 48 hours, which meant Terrence couldn't move or spend what remained of the money. At that point, my attorney told me it was time to let Terrence know that we knew. I thought about calling him. I thought about texting. Instead, I drove to his apartment. He lived in a 2-bedroom on the second floor of a complex about 15 minutes from my mother's house. I rang the bell. He took a moment to answer, and when he did, he was in a t-shirt and sweatpants, looking like he hadn't expected anyone. He smiled when he saw me. "Hey, how's your mom? Any update?" I said she was improving. I asked if I could come in. We sat in his living room. There was a new flat-screen TV on the wall that hadn't been there the last time I visited, which was 2 years ago at Thanksgiving. A new leather couch. I noticed these things the way you notice details when you're trying to stay calm. I told him I'd been going through my mother's finances and I'd found the transfers. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "She authorized those." I said that a power of attorney doesn't authorize transfers made for personal benefit. I said I'd spoken to a lawyer and a fraud investigator at the bank. I said the district attorney's office had received a report. He changed then. The easy, casual expression closed off and something harder took its place. He told me I didn't understand how much he'd done for my mother over the years. He told me she'd always talked about taking care of him. He told me the transfers were an informal loan. He told me I was making a big deal out of nothing. I asked him if he had any documentation of an agreement with my mother about a loan. He didn't answer. I told him his assets had been frozen. I told him the bank was pursuing recovery of the transferred funds. I told him he would be hearing from my attorney. He stood up. His voice got louder. He said my mother would be furious when she woke up and found out what I'd done. He said I was tearing the family apart over money. He said she'd always babied me and I'd never understood what it meant to struggle. I stood up too. I was shaking, but I kept my voice steady. I told him that my mother worked 2 jobs to raise me alone. I told him she scrimped and saved for 30 years to build that account. I told him she'd called it her safety net, for herself, for me, for emergencies. And I told him that it was stolen while she was unconscious in a hospital bed, and no amount of history or family feeling made that okay. I walked to the door. He said, "You'll regret this." I opened the door and left. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a few minutes. I wasn't crying. I felt something strange. Not relief exactly, but a kind of solid calm I hadn't felt in weeks. The weight I'd been carrying, the fear of confronting him, the anxiety of not knowing what he'd say, it was still there, but it felt bearable now. I'd said what needed to be said. I'd done what needed to be done. Whatever happened next was out of my hands in a way that felt like freedom. My mother woke up 4 days later. Not fully, not the way it happens in movies, where someone opens their eyes and asks what happened and everything is immediately normal. She was confused for a long time. She couldn't speak clearly for the first week. The neurologist told me the stroke had caused damage to the area of the brain that processes language, and that she'd need intensive speech therapy and that recovery could take months. But she knew me. The second time I walked into her room after she regained consciousness, she looked at me and her face changed, and she reached out and grabbed my hand and held it, and that was enough. I didn't tell her about the money right away. She had enough to recover from. Over the following months, the legal process moved in the slow, grinding way legal processes do. The district attorney filed criminal charges against Terrence, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, which in our state is a felony. The civil suit proceeded alongside. The bank's fraud team completed their investigation and confirmed that the transfers constituted POA abuse. They cooperated fully with the legal process. Some of the money had already been spent. The new TV, the new couch, a car payment, credit card debt Terrence had been carrying for years. The bank was able to claw back approximately $280,000 of the original $340,000 through the asset freeze and account holds. The remaining $60,000 was gone. My attorney was honest with me. Recovering that last $60,000 would require Terrence to either have other assets or to make restitution payments over time, which the civil judgment would require, but which depended on his ability to actually pay. It wasn't everything. It wasn't whole. But it was most of it. Terrence took a plea deal. He avoided trial in exchange for 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory restitution payments, and a permanent bar from ever being named in any financial or legal document involving my mother again. He didn't go to prison, which I spent some time being angry about. My attorney was straightforward with me. First-time offense, cooperation, no prior record, and an overloaded DA's office meant prison was unlikely. The restitution and the felony conviction were, realistically, the outcome. I told myself it was enough. On most days, I believed it. My mother has been home for 4 months now. Her speech has improved significantly. She still pauses sometimes when she's looking for a word, and certain sounds take effort, but she's almost entirely herself again. She does speech therapy twice a week with a therapist she likes and complains about in equal measure. She makes her own coffee in the morning and feeds her cat, and calls me every Sunday. I told her about Terrence and the money once she was stable enough to hear it. She sat very still while I explained, and when I finished, she didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "I knew something was wrong with him. I always knew." She cried a little. I cried too. Then she asked me how much we got back. And, when I told her, she nodded slowly like she was filing it away somewhere. She hasn't spoken about Terrence since. She doesn't ask about him. She changed her beneficiary designations and her emergency contacts, and she sat with a new attorney and updated all her documents, and she asked me to be the one to hold her power of attorney now. I said yes. The thing I think about most when I think about those months isn't the anger, though there was plenty of that. It's the image of my mother at that kitchen table, writing Terrence's name on her power of attorney form, trusting that he would do right by her if she ever needed him to. She gave him that trust because she loved him. He looked at her trust and saw an opportunity. I don't know how to make peace with that. I'm not sure I need to. What I know is this: she built that account dollar by dollar, year by year, over 30 years. Most of it came back, and she's home, and she's okay. And on Sunday mornings when she calls, she sounds like herself. A little slower maybe, but still her. Still the most capable person I know. If you're watching this and someone you love has given another person financial authority over their life, please check in on it. Have the conversation. Review the documents. Trust your instincts if something feels off. Financial exploitation of family members, especially elderly parents, is far more common than most people realize, and it almost always comes from someone trusted, someone close, someone who knew exactly where to look. My mother's safety net is mostly still there. She still calls it that, and now I'm the one making sure nobody touches it. I've thought a lot about what made Terrence believe he could do what he did and walk away clean, and I think the answer is simple, even if it's ugly. He counted on the fact that nobody would look. He counted on the chaos of a medical emergency to create cover. He counted on my mother being unconscious and me being overwhelmed and the paperwork being confusing enough that by the time anyone noticed, the money would be gone and he'd have some story ready about informal agreements and family understanding. He was almost right. That's the part that stays with me. Not that he tried. I've made a kind of peace with who Terrence is, or at least I've accepted that I can't change it. What stays with me is how close it came to working if I hadn't opened that envelope. If I'd set it aside like I almost did. If I'd waited another week or 2 weeks or until my mother was well enough to ask about her own accounts. The money would have been gone and recovery would have been nearly impossible, and my mother would have woken up from the worst experience of her life to find that the safety net she'd spent 30 years building had been cut out from under her by someone she loved. I don't think Terrence is unusual. I think people like him exist inside a lot of families, quietly watching, quietly waiting for a moment when the people around them are too tired or too scared to pay attention. That's not cynicism, it's just something I know now that I didn't know before. Vulnerability invites exploitation, not because the world is cruel, but because some people have decided that other people's vulnerability is an opportunity. The only real defense is the one my mother didn't have: someone paying attention. What I learned, what I'd tell anyone going through something similar, is that doing the right thing when you're exhausted is the hardest version of doing the right thing. I was sleeping in a hospital waiting room. I was eating crackers from a vending machine. I was terrified about my mother in a way I don't have words for, and I still had to go to the bank, call the lawyer, review the documents, keep my voice even on the phone with Terrence while knowing what I knew. None of that felt brave in the moment. It felt like survival. But I think sometimes survival and courage are the same thing, wearing different clothes. My mother is home now. She's slower than she was, and some mornings the right words take longer to find, but she's herself. She calls me on Sundays. She complains about her speech therapist. She feeds her cat. She asked me a few weeks ago what I wanted for my birthday, and the fact that she asked, that she remembered, that she was there to ask, was the only answer I needed. Terrence made a choice that said my mother's 30 years of sacrifice were less important than his debt and his comfort. And he's living with that choice now. The conviction, the restitution, the version of himself he showed the world when it mattered. That's not punishment from somewhere outside. That's just the natural weight of who you choose to be, eventually finding you. I think about the envelope on that kitchen table a lot. I almost didn't open it. I'm glad I did.